Welcome, everybody. My name is Michaela. I am the Chief Director of Advocacy for Transhumanity, and I'm being met today with Selene, who is the Administrative Counselor of Advocacy for Transhumanity. We're going to be talking a little bit today about neurodivergency within the trans community and how people interact within the trans community with neurodivergent nuances to how they live their lives. Selene, is there anything I missed in there? Should I have rephrased that in a different way?
No, that was perfectly good.
Perfect. Great. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your experience and help us to better understand, what has your experience as a transgender neurodivergent individual been like?
Well, I didn't technically come out until I was in my 20s, so I didn't really experience what it meant to be trans until then. But as I moved forward as a trans person with neurodivergency, I had issues. I had to basically advocate for myself more and more often, be like, look, I have hearing problems. I can't hear half the time, so you have to look at my face so I can read your lips or facial expressions. Um, but when I came out in college, it was during COVID, so I couldn't really understand everybody because the masks made it a hard thing for me to understand. And as a deaf person who's also trans, it's not easy to understand anybody when they wear masks. And it's like, I can't read your lips, so I can't understand a word you said.
Oh,
And
yeah, that sounds like that would be terrible.
oh, it was because I came out during the pandemic when I went to a deaf college, actually. And the problem was, even with the clear masks, I couldn't read it because they would fog up the masks so much. So I'm like, what are they trying to say?
Yeah, that has to be so frustrating. I know a couple of people who are hearing impaired and how much they struggled through the pandemic. I think we often forget because it's just so natural with how most people communicate. We forget how difficult it can be when other people don't have that same capacity to be able to understand through the mask.
Yeah, and even with my captionings and interpreters, they still couldn't understand people with the mask. So they were like, in captions, it'll be like audio something that I couldn't hear what the teacher said, or the professor couldn't hear what the person couldn't hear what the professor said.
So you use captioning like with Zoom and things like that. Do you find the captioning effective?
Zoom, it's less effective than Google because what I've seen with the Google chats is it's a lot more effective on picking up what you want to say than what does.
Interesting. Yeah, I never even thought about that. Obviously, I know we live in a day and age where like AI is reading constantly to be able to output clearer captioning than we've ever had in the past, but I've never really thought about it from a live use standpoint. Um, to me, that's something unique and new, and I'm sure that's extremely beneficial to people who deal with hearing impairment issues. Uh, how long has this been even a common use for you? I mean, I would assume in your childhood this wasn't.
Basically, since I went to school, but most of the time we didn't have the technology to do video chats as much because we didn't really use them in school up until the pandemic because I rarely had any remote classes. Um, so I wouldn't have any because I went to public schools for most of my life. Then I went to a private college, and as soon as the pandemic hit, we had to go Zoom from the rest of the semester, second half of my first year of college of the second semester, and we had to use it all through then. And I found I was doing so much better while I was working remote.
I could understand that. It seems like in a lot of ways it's probably easier Um, that's just fascinating to me. In what ways would you say your experience as a transgender person intersect with your experiences as a neurodivergent person?
Well, we definitely have faced more oppression in the two identities. Because in the deaf community, we faced a lot more persecution and ridicule for even using our hands to sign, because they would slap our hands or something in the older times, but as it got less effective, they forced us into speech therapy. And while I find it's okay for some, I found it was kind of like stupid because it's like I could say the words, I just didn't need the help.
So you didn't find speech therapy effective for you personally?
No, I feel it's not as effective as they think it is, because sooner or later I'm going to go basically completely deaf and I won't be able to use my mouth and I'll have to use my sign.
So what would you suggest would be a more practical alternative?
An immersion where I went to a deaf college where we got to learn how to do ASL on our own and chat with people, and we took some courses. And what I did, because I did a new signers program for 2 weeks, and uh we had to basically, as our final project, not talk from 11 in the morning till 4 p.m. in an amusement park and sign what we want to say or point to what we want to say want for food.
But what happens when people who you're communicating don't know how to sign? How do you mitigate
That's
that?
where we possibly use text to say what we want to say, or we just point to what we want through the coupon or something.
That makes sense. I mean, technology has progressed so much. I feel like I feel like it's so easily overlooked how
It,
technology is capable of providing benefits to those with various disabilities.
it
We
hasn't
just
progressed enough for deaf people, because I know some deaf people prefer wearing a hearing aid or a cochlear implant slash Baha. Those haven't progressed enough to catch up to the century. It's still like 20th century style.
interesting. Why do you think it, well, I mean, maybe maybe you don't. Why do you think the technology hasn't increased?
Because there's not enough research, and they've we tend to the deaf community tends to be close knit, that we don't want the technology because a lot of people think we need to be fixed, when in reality we don't.
I mean, that seems to be a common element of anyone who is different from the norm. People expect that you're broken and someone has to fix you, like there's some magic solution. I deal with that as a trans person all the time, where
Same with my
people,
dad. He was trying to basically fix me, and it's just like, you're not fixing me. You're just making me more broken.
yeah, I would never imagine trying to tell somebody who is audio impaired. I would never imagine trying to tell them how to fix their problems. Like, where do I get off? Even if I had done a variety of research and collected information, like, who am I to tell you how to fix your problem? Like, even how you described it, there are different people who have audio impairments that some of them signing is the way that they want to work. Some of them they benefit um, from speech therapy, and other ones don't. And each person is uniquely different. It's hard to put a blanket statement on everybody and expect everyone to fit into a single category.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they did that with my identity of being hard of hearing slash profoundly deaf. They mixed everybody and be like, "Oh, we need to fix their hearing so they can be able to speak." It's like, where do you get off saying that? It's like, no, we don't obviously want to be fixed. One, two, some of us, even if we get the devices, we change our minds and say, no, we don't want this anymore.
Like a colloquial implant?
Even hearing aids, I stopped wearing hearing aids when I went to college because it's pointless.
Tell me about that. Why do you feel like it's pointless?
Because
Help
it's
me
just
understand.
all it does is amplify sounds and stuff that I can hear. And it's just like, it's just the same thing. So why do I even need it? Because I'm going to go deaf anyway. And while, yes, I'm a candidate for getting a cochlear implant, doesn't mean I'm going to go get one.
Right, because everyone has their own way that they want to live their lives
And I'm
and
not
how they want
consenting
to
to
experience
one.
the world around them. How how are how are our gender identities affected by our disabilities? I mean, are they to you? Are they?
It depends on per person, even with being on a spectrum and being with a disability, it depends. Um, I know some drag people who are disabled and it affects their performances because they can't dance or do the things they want to do. Um, but a lot of the time, I don't think I don't think it affects us because we tend to keep that side to ourselves more than our trans identity because we want to live our truth, but also we sometimes have to hide other identities so we don't get ridiculed.
Do you feel like there's ridicule from within the trans community?
No, I haven't received any much ridicule from the trans community for being hard of hearing because it's more open than it was during the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, everybody was a close knit groups, and they had certain groups um who were feeling like they can relate and click. Other groups were like everybody's open to it and has their own opinions.
Fair, I can understand that. In what ways have you found empowerment and strength in embracing your transgender identity and embracing the reality of neurodivergency?
That's actually funny because when I got older, I decided, okay, if I hear the best thing about being hard of hearing is we can ignore the ignorance of stupid people. So if they're saying something and they try to have us turn around, I'll be like, I'm sorry, did you say something? Because then I'll be like, because then it's like I can't hear what they're trying to say. So it's like, I'm not listening to it because I can't hear them.
You know, sometimes I wish I could do that when people are not so nice to me. That's actually kind of a cool application for how you would utilize that.
Yeah.
So, not just the transgender community, but as fellow human beings, um, how can we more effectively be accepting and help to accommodate people who are neurodivergent?
What we can do is accept how they react towards others and give them their own personal space. Because I know certain people with disabilities have um, boundaries where they don't like to be touched or they're nonverbal, so they can't communicate through words, so they have to communicate through text. Um, and we just have to be accommodating of whatever disability they have so that we can um, be able to understand where they're coming from and where we're coming from so we can find middle ground.
Middle ground is always a hard thing for people. I'm not exactly sure why people struggle so much to find common ground. I feel like a lot of the world around us has truly segregated themselves into identity politics. Like, I belong to this group, so I must think all of these things. And then there's no common ground because if someone doesn't fit into their group, they don't want to find anything to connect with other people. It's you're either part of my identity or you aren't. I'm not saying that's across the board with everybody, but I do see a lot of commonality in that. And I feel like I've
Yeah,
been seeing
it's
that.
more common in the trans community than it is with the neurodivergent community because in the neurodivergent community, we're able to find more common ground than with trans community because of people are too far spread when it comes to our identity as trans people.
I think there's also a potential simplicity to the idea that if I'm neurodivergent and I want to be accepted by other neurodivergent people, people have to understand my brain is not going to react exactly the same way as the next person's brain because you're neurodivergent, right? You diverge from neuro what's the word I'm looking for? Neurotypical. You diverge from neurotypical, so it would make sense that everybody would be uniquely different in the way that they process information. And inherently, if you're going to have some type of community that supports those who are neurodivergent, I feel like you would have to accept the reality that people think differently in your group.
Big time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. And the beneficial applications of that. I would also wonder, and I would love to do some research. I would wonder if parents of children who have autism or other neurodivergencies, I wonder if they're more accepting of the trans community.
It depends based on not just on how they react with their friends and all, but it also depends on their um upbringing because it's the parents that are more non-accepting than um from like I'm going to give some examples like the 60s and 70s. They're not as accepting as much as like the 80s and 90s parents.
You find the 80s and 90s parents are significantly more accepting?
Big time. Because
What kind of ways?
I have friends who are in their 30s and 40s and they're more accepting of being of me being trans than say my parents who are in their 50s.
Yeah, I mean, my parents are in their 60s and I've had my struggles. I mean, anyone who's read anything I share, I love. I love my parents. I always talk about how much respect I have for my father. My father taught me good, valuable principles, being a Christian man and having strong beliefs in morality. Um, but me transitioning was a very, very difficult thing for him to accept. A
Yeah,
very, very difficult thing.
yeah, my dad's the same way because he said, well, if you're going to medically transition, don't use any of my insurance.
Ooh, that's
Yeah,
rough. I mean, that's one benefit I have being a little bit older is I didn't have to worry about the impact as much that it was going to have for my parents because they couldn't actually change anything about my life. They didn't have any control to make a determination. Like I wasn't on their insurance, right? So I didn't have to worry about those things.
yeah,
Um, it's interesting because now you're making me think back on my childhood because I've been trans my entire life. But I didn't come out publicly as trans until my mid 30s. So
yeah.
looking
I was
back
a
on
little
that,
younger than you when I came out because I started questioning my identity halfway through my senior year of high school. And then I thought I was a cross dresser at first, but then I was like, that doesn't really fit me because they only dress for certain events and all, but I want to dress all the time. So I researched it into more into my first year of college. Then it clicked, and my partner was like, at the time was like, you're trans, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of figured that. I came out to her. And she's like, yeah, I kind of figured that, and I'm like, why didn't you tell me? And she's like, I wanted you to discover it for yourself. And I haven't talked to my ex partner in a couple years now because um we didn't have a really great relationship after COVID hit and we were both hard of hearing, so it was kind of hard to visit during COVID time. So now
I'm
I'm
sure
dating
that would be
someone.
difficult.
Yeah, now I'm
Yeah,
dating someone else, but they understand my disability and stuff, and they're very respectful about video chatting in case I want to talk to them.
that's nice that you have that. I think that that's a good thing that, I mean, I would be concerned if you didn't in a relationship have that kind of support, but, I'm happy you were able to find that. Um, can you share with us a pivotal moment or experience that helped shape your understanding of your gender identity and your neurodivergency?
Well, when I was getting towards, because I had to go to classes and stuff on remote, and um I had already came out, and this was my last year of college. There was a stupid anti-abortion group on our campus, and I saw something that pissed me off because it was like, you don't diss on same-sex marriage saying that's abortion, because it's like, really, we don't cause abortions because that's no. And they were violating the Americans with Disability Acts on our public campus because they had whistles, which is against my disability. So those two blended together, and I'm like, get them off my campus. They're traumatizing students here.
What I'm still flabbergasted. What could they possibly be implying that those
So
who
it was
are
called. So the acronym is called GAP, Genocide Awareness Project, and they said basically abortions were wrong, and they use examples like the Holocaust, which was a no-no, the lynchings of the 60s, religious honor killings, and same-sex marriage. It was it was driving me nuts because I was like, and they had a truck showing abortion is wrong and showing a fetal thing and having the truck stop everywhere they could and hitting the brakes. And I'm thinking to myself, this is gonna freaking piss off other neurodivergent peoples because their ears are not okay with this.
yeah, like to read some of their propaganda to try to figure out how they correlate all of those things together because they just don't make any sense to me how you would tie
Yeah, and
that.
we
But
complained to the school board because they were being anti-Semitic because saying the Holocaust is caused abortions, and I'm like, excuse me? I have a friend whose relative was in the World War II. You don't get to say this shit.
right, right. How do you think your experience as a neurodivergent person has shaped your journey as a transgender individual or vice versa?
Well, my neurodivergence has impacted my trans identity because I have to advocate every time I have to go pick up my medication for my transition or talk to my doctor to see if I need to um, get the refill. And now I have to basically advocate for myself because literally in 31 days, I am going to see some doctors for a gender consultation for surgeries,
For SRS or for something different?
for bottom surgery, maybe some breast augmentation, and voice therapy. I'm not sure about FFS because I have my tubes still in, and I don't know if they can work with that without causing me possible bleeding to death.
I mean, they never took mine,
They never did with mine too.
but I've had 3 sessions of FFS, so it wasn't a problem for me. I would assume a competent doctor would be able to do the same for you.
Hoping because mine's considered moderate to severe EVA, so it could be leading to where I could possibly die on the table.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, good reason why you find the right doctor. I hear that. So tell me, what challenges, if any, have you faced in navigating both being transgender and in navigating your neurodivergent communities?
It's like I have to repeat, ask people to repeat what they're saying because I didn't hear them first time because they're going like this or they're like this, and I'm like, I can't hear you. And the first time I got my COVID test before I came out, um, I had to tell the guy who's doing my test, "Hey, I'm hard of hearing, so I can't hear." And he starts shouting, and I'm like thinking of "See No Evil, Hear No Evil," the Gene Wilder film, "Deaf, not stupid."
I can't. Sometimes I'm astonished at how ignorant people still are. Like it surprises me so much that people. I don't. I wish I had a better response to people yelling at you as if that solves anything. That makes me mad. Like that makes me mad.
Yeah, it makes me upset, and it's like, you know what? I'm not going to deal with this. It's their ignorance that they're going to be stupid.
Right. And that is always hard is figuring out what hills are worth dying on, right? If you're going to
Yep.
fight a battle, how valuable is it to really fight it?
Hmm.
You only have so much energy, right? As advocates, as advocates, what's the most important time for us to show support and how can we show support?
I think now is the most important time to start showing being advocates and showing our support because a lot of people are scared right now, even in the trans community, because we're forced from our home state that was so friendly at first. Now that we have to go out of our own homes and move to a different state like Minnesota, which is next door to me, because that's a safe haven for me in case Wisconsin becomes anti-trans towards me.
Is that something you're seeing as an issue out in Wisconsin right now? Like, is
Not
it becoming?
now, but I'm worried that it might because of politicians are starting to say shit that it's like,
So you think from a political standpoint,
it's
um,
mainly the political and how legislative powers are taking away our rights.
right? And that has been a huge issue. I don't think most people who aren't part of the trans community, and even probably plenty of people who are in the trans community, I don't think they realize how many bills just in the last year alone have been developed.
Over
But
500 were developed.
yes,
And the
I
problem
was
is
looking.
they see it as a social, mental contagion instead of realizing, hey, we're coming out because we're more safer than we were in the 60s and 70s, where we were getting lynched and beaten.
Oh yeah, I mean we are definitely safer. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about when we knew we were trans. I knew I was trans since I was 5. I came out to my parents when I was 5. That did not work out well for me in a very, very Christian household. There's a reason it took me until my mid 30s to come out publicly.
It took
And
me till my adult years to come out because I was worried about coming out to people. And the first family member I came out to was my uncle. And then it got forced out by my dad.
that got forced out by your dad. So your
He
dad outed you.
he forcibly made me out myself.
Is that a story you want to share with us, or is that too personal?
It's kind of too personal.
It's okay. You don't have to share it. I totally get it. There are definitely stories and experiences around my transition that I don't care to share with people either. You're good. Um, I just figured if it was something you felt like sharing, I would love to have heard it, but it's fine, no worries. What misconceptions do you wish people would be more aware of when it comes to being both transgender and neurodivergent?
That we want surgeries because not all trans people want bottom surgery or breast augmentation or FFS. Um, and as a neurodivergent person, we don't obviously want um the help because sometimes we find our own ways to help ourselves. And those two combined, because as a trans neurodivergent woman, they basically have two misconceptions. We're either sex workers or we're gamers.
Right.
And I'm neither one of those because I don't game as often. One, and two, I have a psychology degree, so they need to get off their high horses with those misconceptions.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm a businesswoman, right? Like we're in my office right now having a conversation. Well, I mean, I'm talking to you from my office. You're not sitting in my office with me, but I'm sure people viewing this understand the context. We're in my office right now talking. Like, I mean, I'm not a sex worker either. um, you know, I think it's one of the things surprised me transitioning is how the moment I started transitioning, people thought it was about sex. It was
Yeah,
amazing to me.
it was like really demeaning because it's like we're forced into those professions, and it's like we should not be forced to be put into these professions. And I know some people who work as like bartenders or coffee baristas, but even then, it's harder to get those jobs because of, oh, we don't want your political views in here. And I'm like, I don't bring my political views um into my work unless somebody brings it up.
Even without, I think there are stigmas against trans women. I think there are stigmas against the trans community in
Especially
general, but
trans women is
yeah.
there's more stigma than trans men, which is like that's not fair.
Well, in a society that views men as more aggressive and more violent, I understand where the society would be coming from if they perceived me as male trying to invade some female space. I think it's an ignorant way of looking at the world, but I can't deny the methodology that somebody would use in order to bring their viewpoint or perspective to think that way. Have you found that, like, have you been able to find sources of support that particularly have helped you in your transgender journey? And separately from that, have you been able to find the same within your neurodivergent journey?
No, because there's not been a lot of research, and it's like as a someone who's going to possibly go back into the medical, back to therapy, I'm like, there's not a lot of studies on gender studies, especially on trans people in general, and it's like appalling.
I think with how actively people discuss it and how politicized being trans has become, it is quite surprising to me and a little disconcerting that you're right. There's not nearly enough research. I think from a legislative standpoint, there are a few things somebody can do that are more morally corrupt than saying we do not have research, we do not have knowledge, and we're going to legislate from a bench based on our own personal opinions of something because we do not have the knowledge to validate it. Um, to me, that's criminal. To me, that's treasonous. And that is very, very frustrating when I see things like that happen, and they happen far too often. The vast majority of the bills that I've read, of the 543 bills I read from last year, The vast majority of them are we do not know, and because we don't know, we're going to control other people's rights. And that is just
That's what
moral.
happened in mainly the bills are coming from southern states of Texas and Florida.
You know, a lot of them are, but we have bills in every single state. Every single state pushed a different bill. Um, uh, even predominantly liberal states still had bills. Now, mind you, they didn't pass as
Yeah, because
effectively
we
in
told
liberal
them, no, we
states.
don't want this bill.
Right. They didn't pass as effectively in liberal states, but they still came through. There were still bills in liberal states. And me, myself, I'm not liberal or conservative. I'm completely independent from either. But I do recognize that, I mean, I live in a very, very conservative state, and there are pros and cons to everything. I like the people here. They generally keep to themselves. They're kind to me for the most part, but I know they judge me. And I know from a legislative standpoint, I'm at a greater threat than I would be if I was in other places. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, those pros and cons, what are they worth to me? And that's a complicated question. That's a very complicated question. And not something I think we could ever possibly answer in a segment like this. Um, have you been able to, how have you been able to adapt to the world around you?
I tend to focus on myself when I'm working and tend to ignore when people don't realize I'm trans because I don't shout it out because it's like I don't care because it's not really their business anyway. And I just like if I'm out in public and I'm dressing feminine, it's like, and people give me looks, I'm like, don't care. It's my life. It's my body, my choice.
Right. I mean, that seems like the paramount of the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Like you should be able to decide how you do that. Nobody else should have any influence over it, as long as you aren't victimizing somebody else. Like, what business is it of theirs? I hear you on that one. I mean, I could not be more sympathetic or empathetic toward that feeling. I've had my fair share of uncomfortable situations from being transgender, public situations. Do you find it common for people um, who don't know how to meet you halfway? Like, is that a common issue where people just they aren't finding that center
I
space?
found it where recently in a couple past months, there's been one of my roommate's friends, they say they're for trans people, but it's like they have to be um medically transitioned. And I'm thinking to myself, no, they don't. They do not have to medically transition to be trans. You can be trans by just socially transitioning and legally changing your name.
Interesting. I can't think of many circumstances I've dealt with people who are trans supportive post medical transition. That seems really strange to me. Like, how do you get from where you are now to post medical if you don't go through the like that seems really strange that people would create that dividing line. But at the same time, like, how could I not put it past people? People do that kind of crazy thing all the time. They create double standards and rules that don't coincide when you look at it from a logical flow. What support or awareness do you feel is lacking for individuals within the trans community?
We're not getting enough support that we have a hard time getting a job or even getting basic insurance to cover what we need for life-saving medication. That's one thing. And as a hard of hearing and deaf people, we don't even get the basic support of ASL interpreters or captioning devices in classes, even in public schools. And that's like very lacking.
You said earlier that Google does a better job at captioning. There are tools now, right? Like AI app tools that will do
Yeah,
real-time translation,
with
right?
my phone, there's a system where it has live captioning, but even if you want to use your phone for live captioning in school, you have to, for people with neurodivergent issues, you have to have an IEP plan in order to be able to use your phone.
What is that?
It's an individual evaluation plan for people with neurodivergent issues.
Who creates that? Like
Your
who?
caseworker, who you start with in one school, then it gets transferred to another one when you get to middle school and high school. And then after that,
So so through
sometimes
the
it gets
education
transferred
process.
into college.
So through the education process, somebody would evaluate you, and that they would have some type of um, they would have some type of diagnosis, and then that is what would hold with you through the rest of your education to be
Yeah,
able to utilize that.
I had to have two evaluators because the first one couldn't even diagnose it properly. So they fired him and had to get somebody else to diagnose me properly.
Wow, that I wonder how common that issue is.
Pretty common.
Pretty common. Like you
Yeah,
find within neurodivergent communities that that's a common issue.
it's pretty common issue with neurodivergent people today because they say that one diagnosis and then later on they find out, oh no, you really have this.
Interesting. What advice would you give to other transgender individuals who are also neurodivergent?
Keep advocating for yourself, and if there's someone who's not really listening, find somebody else to talk to because they're not gonna understand you and come from into a middle ground area where you can agree to disagree. So remove those people from your life so you're not worried about that.
Do you find that agree to disagree as a common feeling for you? Like, are you the type of person who is truly willing to agree to disagree with people?
If it's something that is like, you know what, I'm not going to argue about this anymore. Let's agree to disagree. But if it's something that I know is wrong, I will continue to argue the point.
I feel like I'm the same way, within reason. Like, I, I am an aggressive debater. Like, I will definitely tell you what I'm thinking. I'm the type of person at the same time who I'm like, this study says this, and this study says this, and this study says this, and that's why I'm right. I'm not so much the type of person who just says I feel something because I feel it. I expect other people to
And
understand
I
it.
and I agree with that because I always try to pull up proven facts. Be like, no, this is not what has happened. This is what actually happened and all.
I think it's a healthier way of debating, and I think it's a healthier way of presenting one's thoughts and perceptions. I think, like, you'll notice when I'm speaking, I say I think and I feel, and I do this quite often, but not when I'm debating. When I'm debating, I like to delineate that this is my feeling from this is what evidence suggests. I think we struggle to do that as a society. And I also think that because we struggle to do that as a society and we work so hard, what we were saying earlier, groupthink, we assume that because our group thinks something, it must be right. And I don't think that that's true. And I don't think that that's true in any community. I don't just mean our community, I mean a group in general. Just because it is groupthink ideology doesn't mean it's true. You should evaluate the information. You should have an opinion of your own. And if you're going to follow a group ideology, you should at least support where that opinion is coming from with evidence. Can you share with us, as this is going to be my last major question, can you share with us a positive experience that made you feel an affirmation being trans and being neurodivergent?
So actually I can it was my birthday and I had we were going out for my birthday as a last hurrah because this was when I was living with a different person. Um, and my roommate took me out. I had just finished going to the bathroom and all, and this little girl came up to me, probably yay high, and she's like, "I like your shoes," and it made me feel happy because it's like makes me under happy and all, knowing that not every kid is gonna assume your gender like most parents force their kids to. And it's like, and I had to look down for a moment. I said thank you because I couldn't hear her for a moment. And I told her, the mom, she was very nice about it and all.
I think that's lovely. I, I feel like I get more affirmations from just kind people who just give me a basic compliment on something. Like it's simple, like we can share love as people with relative ease. And it's sometimes disheartening how uncommon those experiences are.
It's unfortunate because of how common it is for people to assume negative than try
Right.
to assume positive in our community and the neurodivergent.
Truth. Selene, do you have anything else you want to share with viewers? Anything else you feel compelled that you haven't expressed yet that you really feel needs to be said?
Well, I think that it would be awesome to see more neurodivergent trans people go into the medical professional field, especially the therapy field, because we need more trans therapists like Marie and soon me, because I'm gonna go back to school and get my degree, my master's degree, to in order to practice. And I think we need more of that in today's society because it's like I've heard a lot of trans people and neurodivergent people complain there's not a lot of queer representation in the therapy field.
Tell our viewers a little bit about what you and Marie do.
We haven't started yet, but once the organization is up and running, um I would be helping with the intake forms and getting the patients ready to meet with our therapist Marie, who will help talk about what she'll be doing. And then I would also lead support groups in case they want to do a support group instead of just one-on-one individual therapy sessions.
And that's through transhumanity.
Yeah.
How do we have we created our process? Like, are we
No, we
familiar
haven't
with?
because we haven't finished the finalization process of becoming a nonprofit organization yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean that is a major step to finalizing that.
Yeah,
But Marie is a licensed therapist, and she does
yeah,
do licensed trans therapy,
yeah, and
which
I'm
is
thankful for her because she's helping me on top of helping others in our trans humanity group. And it's like I'm going for my consultation in a month, and I have to have the letter so that they know I've been living this way for 2 years,
right.
and
I think a
medically
lot of
speaking.
people have
But
no idea that you have different consultations have requirements that
yeah,
I think that that's a common thing that people, I watched an episode of Family Guy years ago where Quagmire's dad transitions
oh yeah, I
and
saw that, and I'm like,
uh, and he just walks into a hospital, has a surgery, and walks out all ready to go, all healed, and everything's good. And you're like, um,
that's not how it goes.
that's not how that works.
It's like a grueling 3 to 4 months of in bed.
Yes. And on top of that, they're not going to do face surgery at the same time that they're doing other surgeries. Usually your face surgeries end up getting broken up into a couple depending on what work you're
Yeah,
having done. You have to get different letters of approval from different therapists, and you have to go through these long, arduous processes. I am astonished at how simple people truly think that transitioning is. It
it
is a complicated process.
it was a bitch when I kept trying to find a trans friendly doctor to help start my medical process medicine wise,
Hmm.
and I was lucky to start within the first appointment.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I started transitioning, I went to my family doctor and he's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to help you. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, you need to find a trans related doctor, reviews your, somebody who reviews your blood work, somebody who makes sure that you're taking the appropriate amount, someone who's trained specifically in ensuring that all those things are balanced properly. I had no idea it was going to be that complicated. I thought, oh,
Yeah,
I
and
want to
I got
transition.
lucky
I'm just
with
going to go talk to a doctor and I'm all done. It was not that simple.
no,
Um,
and it's gonna take me a while, but I got lucky with finding a hospital that's willing to do gender surgeries. Luckily, there's a Mayo Clinic about 2 to 3 hours away from me.
Good for you. Good for you. I I think we would benefit from being able to provide better, more comprehensive information on the steps that um, that many people want to take. Because we talked about it, not everybody wants to do all of that. But for the people who do want to do these things, I feel like we would benefit from being able to provide more comprehensive resources. In fact, that's something I think I'm probably going to take on to start trying to put together some more comprehensive resources.
Yeah, and I can always provide for whoever's on the Midwest section. I can always provide resources of what's the best place to get your gender care and what's best resources if you can't do it in a doctor's office and where to go for hospitals.
I mean, that's the benefit of a community, as we're all in different places. You and I are, what, 1,500 miles apart. We're all in different places, and we all have different things we can contribute because of our demographics that we're living in. Selene, I really appreciate your time today. Like, I feel like I enjoyed our conversation. I enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better. We've worked together for some time now, and I don't think we've ever actually sat down and had a conversation, which I know that's probably on me, but still, I'm happy that we had that opportunity.
Likewise.
Thank you for your time, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.